The Pentagon Press Association had said Friday the public has a right to know when U.S. cabinet members are hospitalized. As the nation's top defense leader, Secretary Austin has no claim to privacy in this situation. Joining me now to talk about that and much more, Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma. Senator, welcome to the show. You sit on the Intel Committee. When did you get word of this, and do you think we should have known more sooner?
I got word of this yesterday when the news started breaking to be able to come out on it. It's pretty shocking on this because when you're the Secretary of Defense, you need to make everyone aware that you're actually going to be out of pocket. It's worse than just he didn't notify the White House. They actually notified the White House and everyone else that he was working from home during that time period when he was actually hospitalized, and his number two was on vacation and not available as well. Even apparently the National Security Council didn't know it. The White House didn't know it. Congress didn't know it. We're at a time of a lot of turmoil internationally, and suddenly have the Secretary of Defense, more than just a matter of wasn't there, actually sent over false information saying I'm working from home when he's not actually available at all. That's a whole different issue.
Well, he says he takes responsibility for the disclosure, so I'm sure there will be many more questions to come. In the meantime, you've been day after day after day been involved in negotiations on what's happening with the border deal. The administration says it needs more money. Republicans have been pushing for policy change. So can you tell us, are you getting to substantive changes that will actually mean something at the border? And when will we see text or know something more?
So we're hoping to get text out by later on this week, but nothing's been done in this area for decades. As you know full well, the Biden administration has authorities they're choosing not to use, but even during the Trump administration, they struggled in certain years because they're limited in some of the authorities that are there. So there's a desperate need in the change in the way we handle asylum, in the process that we actually do for asylum. We've got to end, catch, and release. That means we've got to have more bed space to actually be able to process. We've got to have more people to be able to process, but we've got to fix the process as well. So it's not just a dollars issue. And I would tell you the House and the Senate Republicans have been very upset that the White House continues to say, if you send us more money, we'll fix this. When money has been sent to the White House, they've used that money to facilitate more people coming into the country rather than actually stopping the flow on it. So let's deal with the policy issues on it. Let's change catch and release. Let's change the way we're handling asylum so that real asylees get in, and folks that are just gaming the system to be able to be here for a decade before their hearing is done, they're actually turned around.
So text maybe this week?
Text hopefully this week to be able to get that out. Everybody will have time to be able to read it and go through it. No one's going to be jammed in this process, but it's a matter of trying to be able to get this out. But to make law, we've got to have a Democrat Senate, a Democrat White House, and a Republican House to be able to go through this. So this agreement has to work. Everyone's counting on this actually working, but it's going to have to be agreement that a White House, that it's a Democrat White House and a Democrat Senate can also line up with a Republican House, and we're working to thread that needle for things that actually work.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's going to be a very difficult thing to accomplish. Speaker Johnson, who was at the border this week and took dozens of House lawmakers down there, all Republican, there are reports that he's thinking about negotiating directly with the White House. How would that impact what you're doing? And is the greater concern that even if you get a deal done in the Senate, it can't get through the House GOP, where you have some folks over there making some very concrete demands about what it's going to take to get their vote?
Yeah, I would say the Speaker should always be engaging with the White House. That should be the basic role of the Speaker and of the Leader of the Senate, to be able to negotiate with the White House. Obviously, the House has not been heard. They passed a very strong bill. It was H.R. 2 that laid out principles of here's how to resolve the issues of the border. Unfortunately, there was not a single Democrat that actually voted for that. So the House has put out, this is what actually fixes everything. Now the Speaker's got to be able to sit down with the White House and to be able to work out how we're going to actually be able to get there. That's the same thing we're doing as the Senate, to be able to work through how we're going to get Republicans and Democrats in the Senate on board, something that actually makes a difference on our border, and then to be able to get it passed. And in the House, if we can pass this in the days ahead in the Senate, send it over the House can work to improve it, or the House can take a serious look at it and say, this makes real progress on the border. Let's go get this, bank this, and then keep going for more.
Okay, how much of the border concerns you when it comes to the national security interest? And with that in mind, Secretary Mayorkas, we're told, is heading back down there again. He's also facing impeachment in the House. Do you think he's doing a good job when it comes to national security? Do you support what the House is doing with respect to impeachment?
Well, I would tell you at this point, I don't think anyone sees that it's going well at the border. I don't find Republicans, Democrats, Independents, anyone that looks at the border and says that's going well, that's being handled well. Problem that Secretary Mayorkas has is that he's working for the President of the United States, and these are the President's policies. President Trump had a consistent set of policies, but he had, I think, 4 different Secretaries of Homeland Security, but the policy was consistent on the border, regardless of who the Secretary of Homeland Security was, because he had a set of policies. These are the Biden policies, so the problem is President Biden's policies on the border, not Mayorkas in the way he's carrying it out. And this is a big national security issue, as you mentioned before. We've had literally tens of thousands of people just in the past year that this administration has labeled as a national security risk. They were given the designation special interest aliens. That definition is they are a national security risk. And then they were released into the country into this decade-long backlog. That is a terrible idea to be able to do. So not only do we have individuals that are coming in the country that don't qualify for asylum, and all of us know they don't qualify for asylum, and they're just being released in the country in this backlog, we also know that there are people that are national security risks and have been labeled by this White House as this, that are being released in the country, and we literally have no idea where they are.
Okay, with that in mind, Secretary Mayorkas says he's been advising your group. I don't know if you've been meeting with him face to face or having conversations, but how in the world does he respond to that information, the reality of it?
Yeah, he is not actually doing this policy. He is actually providing what's called technical assistance in it. When we're negotiating things out, at times we have to go back to Homeland Security and say, what is operationally, how does this actually work on the ground to be able to get that? But we're driving the policy issues, but we are reaching out to him to go through technical assistance in the process as well. Okay. I would tell you, he has said several times, give me more authorities and I'll take this on. At this point, we're going to test it out and try to make sure of that, because the biggest thing we can do is actually try to have mandates in this that we actually enforce the border, and to be able to take on the issue of how we actually handle asylum again, because this has been a big problem now for over a decade. Mm-hmm. It does not get better by doing nothing. It gets better by doing something. Congress has to pass something, and after decades of doing nothing in this, we've got to pass something to make this better. Well,
and quickly, this is all tied to the bigger package the White House wants on aid for Ukraine and for Israel. We're looking at a potential government shutdown looming in the next couple of weeks against this backdrop. Your other negotiator on this, Democrat Chris Murphy, Senator, has said this, the fate of the world is at stake in these talks. He tweeted this on Christmas Day. It's up to Republicans in Congress whether this is the last Christmas in a free Ukraine. The fate of the world, is that how this feels to you?
Well, there's a lot that's all tied up into this. The president put together a request for national security and did a request for Israel, Ukraine, what's happening in Indo-Pacific with a rising, more aggressive China, and then also border security. But at the same time, he said, you know, we just need funds for all that. We responded back and said, we understand the funds for Israel. We understand the funds in Taiwan, the funds in Ukraine. But this is not a funding issue along the border. This is a policy issue, and we're demanding a real change in policy. We're engaging to be able to help the rest of the world.